Well, I'm laying in the ambulance and I'm trying to breathe, and it's getting shallower and it's getting harder, and I just couldn't push air anymore. Like, it just wouldn't go through. And I just looked up at them and I just whispered, "This is my last breath." And that's the last thing I remember.
July of 2016, David Beezer lay dying in the back of an ambulance. The high school football coach was in need of several miracles after a boating accident with his family on the Colorado River left him fighting for life.
I had been up and down through that area, thousands of times. Each trip we would go, that was the only way to get in and out back to where we were camping or where our house was. The sun was setting and it was coming down at an angle, and there was a glistening shimmer on the water, but you couldn't tell how deep it was.
A sandbar had developed just inches under the water's surface since the last time David had cruised this stretch of the river. He drove his boat onto the sandbar at nearly 40 miles per hour.
So we went from just going full speed, with a boat full of people just having a great time, to zero within just a few feet. The full force of the collision was right on my neck. I'd hit the steering wheel right at my voice box and airway, and immediately I could feel it was becoming difficult to breathe. My first concern was my family, my kids, but the inability to I physically couldn't really do anything because I was in really bad shape, and I knew that I was in trouble.
Without medical attention, he knew he would soon be unable to breathe.
It became very difficult to breathe very quickly, and I could feel it tightening up, and I could feel my airway starting to close. That was the time that, that you really cry out to God and say, I can't do this, and I'm going to need you to see us through this. And the only way that I could have peace was knowing that I knew who held my future.
David and his family are Christians. As they prayed, they saw God's hand in their time of need.
My wife tried to call 911, and we've been in that area a lot and could never get a cell phone to work from that area. And we tried many times in the past, to try to call and check on something back home, and never gotten through. That day, the phone call immediately went through to 911.
First responders quickly arrived at a nearby boat ramp, but had to wait for a sheriff's boat that was still 20 minutes away. Thankfully, an off-duty sheriff heard about the situation and rushed to the sandbar in his personal boat.
If the off-duty sheriff that came for me had not come, with certainty I would have died on the boat in front of my kids.
While in transit to a hospital in Yuma, Arizona, he sent a text to a friend from church.
I just said that we'd been in an accident and that I thought everybody else was going to be okay. And I said that I was in bad shape. Pray for me.
Hundreds of people began praying for David as news got out about the accident. Before he reached the hospital, his lung collapsed and he passed out. Dr. Brian Weeks explains the severity of David's condition.
What David experienced was what's called a laryngeal fracture, and it's absolutely a life-threatening injury because of its effects on the airway and the person who suffers its ability to breathe. His vocal cord area swelled, and when you swell in your airway, you die.
Doctors were able to insert a breathing tube through the damaged area in his windpipe. He was then life-flighted to St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix. David was placed in an induced coma for 5 days, giving his airway time to heal.
The first trauma doctor, when I woke up, he looked at me and said, "There's only one reason you're alive, G-O-D." And I knew it. I'd been in that ambulance, and I knew that I needed a miracle to make it.
After his release from the hospital, David experienced intense pain and difficulty breathing once again. He was readmitted for an emergency tracheotomy due to a growth in his airway called a granuloma.
We describe that in layman's terms as proud flesh. It's tissue that grows in the setting of healing, and those, again, in a small area like the airway, that can be very problematic.
As doctors prepared to surgically remove the growth, they took another look in his airway and were surprised at what they didn't see.
He went in with the camera and the mass was gone, and he had never seen anything like it. He just looked at it and said, "It's not there."
It probably was divine intervention. I know a lot of people were praying for David, and a lot of people were, holding him up in their thoughts and prayers. David was very fortunate that his granuloma did go away on its own, and that saved a lot of time and an additional procedure.
That's an easy one to explain. God still does miracles.
Just a week later, David had his trach removed and was calling plays for Christian high school football in San Diego, thankful for the answered prayers and the healing that kept him alive.
I have a wife and kids, and he's given me the ability to continue to be a dad. I'm thankful for my friends who rallied for me incredibly, just the prayers of school family, church family, just the outpouring of love. You never really realize how much you're loved until you go through a situation like this. There's times where you know that the game is beyond your level. And this situation was certainly, I knew that I had no role in staying alive. I mean, it was God's hand and God's mercy alone that would keep me alive.